Well, hey everyone, thank you for joining us. I'm Dr. Christy Gardner, and it's my pleasure to serve as the chair of the Department of Communication Arts in Theater and Art at Gordon College. This is, I think, the 6th event of our Summer Digital Fine Arts Festival. Thanks for all of you who've been joining us throughout the summer. We've got a great session tonight. I'm really looking forward to hearing our guest speaker. And just as a reminder, our theme this whole summer, I hope this has been helping you kind of process a lot of world events. What is the role of art in a time of crisis? I'm really looking forward to what our speaker has to say about that tonight. So without further ado, let me turn it over to our event coordinator, who's been running this whole thing this summer, Ryan Canister.
Justin is a sculptor, cartoonist, and designer hailing from Centennial, Colorado. He discovered a love of sculpture halfway through his 3-year career as a graphic design major at Gordon College and graduated with a BA in both sculpture and design. Most notably, Justin was one of 30 artists to work on Natura Obscura, an immersive installation at the Museum of Outdoor Arts in Englewood. He was also a young artist in residence at the Gullagua International Ceramic Research Center in Skalskør, Denmark. Justin's work has been exhibited nationally and internationally, and we're so thankful to have him here with us tonight. So without further ado, let me welcome Justin.
Yeah, well, hello everyone. I'm really excited just to talk a little bit more about my work. Like Ryan said, I'm a Gordon College alumni. I graduated in 2018. I am mainly a sculptor. I work in a lot of different mediums, but sculpture is my main thing, my main love. I work mainly in ceramic, although I work in stone and other materials as well. And you know, I'm just getting started, and there's still a lot to come for me, but I'm excited to talk about what's already happened.
Great. So how the evening's sort of going to be structured is I'll be asking Justin a few questions for the first half of this session, and then if anybody else has any questions later on, feel free to jump in. But I'll start off by saying that I've actually had the privilege to work with Justin a couple times when we were in college together, and I can definitely attest to the fact that he's a great sculptor, great artist. We got to do some marketing work together for the theater department a couple years back, and that was super fun. Justin's work is just super professional, very high quality, and he's just great to collaborate with. So we are very grateful that we could have him as our guest tonight.
Yeah.
So yeah, let me start off. The first question I'll ask you, Justin, is how did you first become interested in art? Would you mind just talking about just sort of your childhood and when you were first sort of drawn to art and how you got started?
Yeah, of course. I've just always been a very creative person. As a kid, I was always drawing. Legos were my one passion in life. I was always building with Legos. And then in high school, I was just in the art scene all over the place. I did a lot of theater. I took some drawing and painting classes, some animation classes, and then I took some graphic design classes as well. And I come from a very scientific family. So my father's an immunologist. My grandpa was an engineer. My brother is studying psychology. So I was thinking about going into the sciences. I loved zoology. But then I was taking these graphic design classes and really, really loving it. Just remembering how important that the arts were to me. And so I was looking at Gordon College for graphic design, and I was looking at Duke University for zoology, and I wasn't really sure, you know, which one I wanted to do at the end of the day. So eventually I submitted my applications to both, and I got scholarships from Gordon and a rejection letter from Duke. So that made my choice for me. But the more I got into art at Gordon, you know, I started out just graphic design, ended up picking up the sculpture concentration along the way. I just realized how important creativity is to me, and that I really wouldn't have been happy doing anything else.
Very cool. And then sort of off of that, what do you think, or how do you think your work at Gordon prepared you for the kind of work you're doing now? Is there maybe a specific class or just a moment in college, or just something that you learned that you think, oh, I like use that all the time now, or that really influenced me?
Yeah, of course. I don't know if, you know, there's a specific moment, but really I think what was really important for me was just, Gordon's art department did a good job of giving a very cohesive education. Some art programs, I think, focus more on the technical aspect of things, how to paint a good painting. And some art programs focus more on the conceptual aspect, like what does it mean? What is your art saying? And Gordon did a really good job of focusing on both. And I'll share a few images of my work here. Pop that up on screen. So this was the first big sculpture that I made when I was at Gordon. So Gordon, when I was there, had this mentorship program where alumni artists would come back and mentor art students. And the goal was to put together a show at the very end of the mentorship program. And so this was an opportunity for me to just really start exploring my ideas and what I wanted to create. And this was when I was taking my first sculpture class. I was just starting to explore clay. And so I decided that I wanted to make a life-sized human and put it next to a cartoon character, because these were the two things I was drawing in my sketchbook all the time. And I wouldn't recommend for your second sculpture ever creating a life-sized human. It was really, really taxing, really complicated. But it was very important for me to create this. And Gordon, my professors were just so supportive and encouraging. They kind of looked at me like, "Are you sure you want to do this?" And I said, "Yes, I do." And they were just so supportive the whole time, and always asking me questions like, what does this mean? Why are you making this? But then also helping me create it both to a technical standard, make this actually look like a human and make this look like the cartoon character I wanted it to look like, but then also holding me to the conceptual standard of, what does this mean for you? And for me, this piece was really kind of my first kind of opening statement as an artist, which was, growing up, cartoons were so important to me, and it's something that I still love to create in my work and display. And for me, there was no difference between the figure drawings I was doing in class, the highly technical landscapes and things, and the cartoons I was making. They were one and the same for me. And it was through a process of talking with my professors and my mentor that I was able to kind of articulate that both in words and in this final piece. So that was really important for me, and it really just gave me the confidence both in the material of clay and just confidence in my ideas to jump into my thesis work, which was called "What If You Had Never Seen a Starfish?" And for me, I was able to start exploring my abiding interest in zoology and animals and creatures of all kinds, and my continuing interest in cartoons and sculpture. And again, there was just that continued encouragement of, why are you making this? And how are you making it? Encouraging me to make this technically as good as I could make it, and conceptually as good as I could make it. And so I think, that mentorship project really opened the door to my thesis, which I think was just incredibly important for me as an artist to learn the kind of dedication it takes, dedication to your ideas and dedication to your craft, and all the long hours it takes in the studio, and the community that art requires as well. It just takes so many people to encourage you. I was, able to exhibit with my friends. These crucifixion paintings in the back are by Damon Kilgore. These map mixed media pieces over to the right, those are by Ansa Stamper, who were two of my very good friends at Gordon. So, really, I think just the Gordon experience as a whole really taught me the importance of community and the importance of dedication to my artwork.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right, and then the next question I have for you is, how does empathy play a role in the work that you do?
Yeah, I think so. Whenever I'm creating these things, they've devolved a little bit from the first characters I was making. Now they're these very strange kind of tentacle organisms. And as I think about these things, I'm trying to make these creatures as strange as I possibly can. But what's interesting to me is the common refrain I get from people is, "Oh, that's so cute," or like, "Oh, I want that as a pet." And people very quickly identify with these things, and to a certain degree, they empathize with them. And I'm really trying to get that reaction out of people. And I think that comes out, the cuteness factor comes out in the fact that these are kind of cartoony. They're bright colors. Usually they're kind of small, like puppy dog sizes. So they're things that people can readily identify with. And my question, my aim in making these things so empathizable is to ask people, if you can empathize with like these weird, bizarre alien creatures, are you also able to empathize with the human being standing next to you? What is it that makes us able to so quickly empathize with an alien or, a cartoon character, and makes it so hard for us to empathize with another human being? And so sometimes that statement is more overt. When I show these things, I try to have an artist statement somewhere that says that. Sometimes, with the work I'm creating, I'm exploring a different theme as well, but underlying, all of these forms that I'm creating, there is that driving desire to make people empathize with these things.
And then sort of off of that, do you want to talk a little bit more just about why your work is so cartoony and isn't more realistic? And I'm curious myself, have you always been drawn towards more of a cartoonish style, or was that sort of a turning point in your art career? When did the cartoon route sort of start?
Yeah, the cartoon route has been my whole life. I've just always been watching cartoons. So one of the reasons is just because my work is so cartoony because I love cartoons. And I joke that my research is like watching like Steven Universe or SpongeBob or something. So I just really enjoy it, but and always have. But B, I think cartoons is something that we can all identify with very quickly, and cartoons really exist kind of in our collective memory. And kind of what I mean by that is we have all interacted with cartoons in the modern day to one degree or another. We all had that show that we watched growing up. We all, maybe you read comic books, maybe you were looking in the funnies, but even you can't get away from them in advertising. There's cartoon characters on cereal boxes, there are cartoon characters advocating for all kinds of brands. So it's something that we've all seen and we all understand. And so I kind of rely on that common understanding to kind of break walls down, because, a lot of times, especially with contemporary work, you can walk into a gallery or a museum and just be overwhelmed in a lot of ways, whether if it's this like beautifully painted landscape, you think to yourself, oh, I could never do that. And that puts up a wall between you and the work. And similarly, a lot of contemporary work is very avant-garde and sometimes very hard to understand, and that puts up a wall as well. But as soon as you see, this brightly colored, almost childlike creature, this childlike cartoon character, that breaks those walls down, and people are more quick to identify with it. And I think that allows me to be able to open up the door for those more serious conversations about things like empathy and, like, who do you identify with? Why do you identify with this thing so quickly? So I guess to sum that up, it's both just because I love cartoon characters and can't stop myself, and it really does kind of serve the conceptual purpose of bringing people down to an even playing field to talk about these things.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I know that I've always, whenever I would see your art around when you were a student, I'd always just be really drawn into it, even though I didn't necessarily understand why it was, but I feel like that makes a lot of sense. Very well
Yeah.
put. So then connected to that too, are there moments when you've seen your work awaken this empathy or understanding in other people when they're viewing it?
Yeah. So I'll skip a few images ahead here. So this piece specifically, this is a piece that I made when I was on a residency at the International Ceramic Research Center in Denmark. So this is a center that is dedicated to kind of preserving ceramics as an art form and pushing it forward. So artists from all over the world come to the center. And my residency was specifically a young artist residency. So in exchange for staying on the art compound for 3 months, I did some studio assistant work. I was performing maintenance, like helping with the galleries, running the kilns, and I was able to create my own body of work while I was there. And the interesting thing was there were so many people from all over the world coming in and out of this place. I met probably like 50 or 60 different artists from all different countries. And I think the interesting thing was that I was commonly the only Christian within that group of artists. And Denmark itself is a very kind of post-Christian culture. And so, it became clear to people very quickly that I was a Christian. And so I was, I went to church in town every Sunday. And I think a lot of artists view Christianity as something that the art world, worked with for a while and then kind of was done with. But so this piece specifically, this is, the title is Spherodon. It's after Saint Spherodon, who is the patron saint of potters and ceramicists. The legend goes that he had a piece of pottery in his hand and he crushed it and it erupted into fire, water, and dust. And he used that to explain the doctrine of the Trinity to people and to evangelize. And so this is my very, in my own very cartoony way, my way of kind of exploring just that story. So in this blue hand right here, it's a little difficult to see, but he's holding half of a vase, so a piece of pottery. And then he has 3 shapes for 3 elements. So there's a yellow pyramid for fire. There's a red cube right here for earth. And then this is the back view. He's got a blue sphere for water as well. And then he's holding up 3 fingers in 1 for the 3 in 1. And so, I wasn't trying to create Saint Spherodon himself. This is not a portrait. This is an exploration just of that idea. And I think, I was able to kind of watch these things I've been talking about, like cartoons and empathy. They were able to open doors for me just to talk with the other artists about where I was at, just with my own faith and where they were at with theirs. And, I don't think I reached, big evangelizing conclusions with these people, but it broke the wall down a little bit because they saw me building this giant thing and were like, what is this? And we had the common interest in ceramics and in clay to talk about it. And, all ceramicists, regardless of their faith, we've all talked about how cool it is when you're working with clay that you're working with the 3 elements, because there's water in the clay. It's, mud directly from the earth. You got to put it in fire for it to harden. So there's this very tactile nature to it that we can all talk about. And so just the story of Saint Spherodon was something that we could all start talking about. And then, the technical aspect of this body of work, he's 3.5 feet tall. He's 2 feet wide on both sides. He has 6 different arms that go in at different places. So it was just something that people would instantly become interested in, and then begin asking me about. And I think it just opened doors for me to talk with them and then to talk with me just about things like faith in a very unthreatening way. And so, even though this specific sculpture has never been shown outside of the artists that I was working with, it's one of the more powerful instances I've had just of being able to talk with people about, their individual lives and their individual stories, all because of this weird 6-armed cartoon saint. So that was a very important moment for me.
Very cool. Yeah, I've been looking at the image of this sculpture for like the past couple of weeks, using it for marketing and stuff,
Yeah.
and was really curious to know more about it. But yeah, it's super, super interesting to hear about. And then sort of off of projects and stuff that you've worked on, do you have a favorite either sculpture you've ever made or favorite just other art project that you've ever done?
Yeah. Well, this one, Spherodon, I think it's the biggest piece I've ever made and the most technically complex. So it's definitely got a special place in my heart. And, it just represents the 3 months I was able to spend in Denmark, and all the people that I met there. So this one is very near and dear to me. But then also, so going back a little bit, so these next 3 pieces here, these are all pieces that I made the summer after graduating. So the year after I graduated, I was a high school teacher back at my old high school here in Colorado. And so it was an opportunity for me just to, be able to teach, learn how much I like teaching. But then it also gave me studio space to work because I was teaching ceramics and I was able to put my own work in the kiln alongside the students' work. And it was just a very kind of low stakes environment where I could really just kind of play with colors, play with forms. It wasn't my thesis, so it wasn't this big weighty thing that I had to do. There was no really gallery commitments I had at the time when I was making these things. So it was just an opportunity for me to take the things I had started to explore in college and started playing with them a little bit more. So I was able just to start doing even wilder, crazier colors, crazier forms. This is probably the craziest thing I made. So all of these very, very thin tentacles kind of bursting out, exploding all over the place. And I don't think I would have been able to make these if I hadn't been in that environment. And it was also very encouraging to be able to have, you know, high school students. So I'd be working on these things in between class periods, and they'd come in and they'd just be so curious about what these things were and start asking me about my work. And they'd have ideas for what colors things should be. And some were good ideas, some were bad ideas. But it was just really fun to be able to make it. It's a relatively small body of work that I made while I was there. But it was fun to be able to just sort of explore with low pressure, and to just be kind of in conversation with some younger artists and see, like, you know, what do you think about this, and how does this speak to you? So those are probably Spherodon and these few that I made as a teacher. I think those are the most important to me.
Nice. Is Spherodon the longest that you ever worked on one sculpture, do you think?
No, I don't think so. So the longest I've ever worked, so this large red piece right here, this is Bertha. She's a little bit smaller than Spherodon. She's about 3 feet tall. And so at the time, this was the centerpiece of my thesis. And so I was making 10 other pieces at the same time. So I think I began working on Bertha in like January or February and didn't finish it until my thesis in May. So about 4 or 5 months. So I think, you know, because it was the biggest piece I'd made at the time, I hadn't made something that big or complex. I had to go really, really slow. But all the information I learned from working on Bertha, I was able to apply to creating Spherodon. And so then I was able to make it a lot faster. So I think he only took me about 2 months, a month and a half to finish.
Nice.
Yeah.
And then I'm also wondering, is there any work of yours, or maybe even just moments in your career as an artist, that you think have had a great impact on people, either pieces maybe that people just had really strong reactions to, or maybe just moments when you've seen other people have really positive reactions to seeing other people's art, anything like that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I've had the privilege of being able to show in, you know, both in the Gordon Gallery for my thesis, and then I've been able to do a couple shows here in Denver as well, a couple of group shows. I did a 2-person show with my friend Courtney, who's a painter. So I've been able to be in a couple different gallery environments. And, you know, sometimes I have multiple pieces, sometimes I just have one piece. But I think, you know, usually at whatever opening there is, I'm kind of hanging around, you know, waiting to chat with people if they want to talk about it. And a lot of times there's a moment where someone will round the corner and see whatever piece it is that I've made, and they'll just start laughing because they think it's, you know, it's really fun and hilarious. And they move from this moment of just kind of humor and joy to this moment of fascination, like, well, what is this thing? And looking at it more closely. I was able to show this piece right here. This is a wall piece. I was able to show this at a gallery in Denver. And I ended up being able to talk with a couple of people who came to the gallery who they were both deaf, and I didn't realize it. So the guy came up to me and tapped me on the shoulder, and he was typing out on his phone, and he asked, "Are you the artist for this piece?" And I, you know, started saying yes. And he asked, "What does it mean?" on his phone. And I was just kind of confused. I didn't quite know what he was saying, like why he was typing on his phone. So then I just kind of started explaining the piece. And then he kind of like waved his hands and pointed to his ears, you know, "I'm deaf." And then I was, "Oh, okay." And then we just passed his phone back and forth and just kind of talked about the piece. And, you know, it was no real important conversation. He was just saying how much he liked it. But it was a moment for me as just a special conversation that I wouldn't have had without having this piece there. So I think that is one individual moment that I think about a lot. But in general, you know, just the smiles that these things can produce in people, those are really important to me as well.
That's great. All right, and then, yeah, just a final question that I have, then we can open it up here. But relating to our theme for this whole festival, I'm just wondering, what do you think the role of art generally is in a time of crisis? And then even more specifically, I thought it might be interesting for you to touch on the role of sculptures and statues in a time of crisis, especially right now as we're seeing so many of these hurtful Confederate monuments and statues taken down all across the country. Just if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, of course. Well, it's such a big issue. It can be difficult to unpack it all. But I think, whenever you're creating a work of art, you are granting a certain level of immortality to whatever it is that you're creating, whether that's a person or an idea. And especially in sculpture, when you create a sculpture of a person, you are bringing that person into our physical space in a way that will last for generations, if not more. So you're giving life to a person or an idea in a unique way that, a painting doesn't necessarily accomplish, because that exists on the wall in two-dimensional space. A sculpture or a monument exists with us and lives with us in a unique way. And so I think, we as a country and as a nation, as we're watching all these Confederate monuments getting torn down, we can't say that we've moved forward as a country from racism when we're granting this level of immortality to these people who fought for it. So I think it's a really unique moment. And for me as a sculptor, it's made me think a lot about, well, why were these sculptures made in the first place? Why were they there? And sculpture is such an expensive endeavor. It's so frequently tied to power, because the people who can pay for these things are the people with the most money. And, so often people in power, if they have a problematic ideal, it can become so problematic so quickly because they're in control. And then that, they commission the sculpture to be built, and then that lasts for forever. And, we don't just see this in American sculpture, you see this throughout history. If you look at sculptures of the Greeks and Romans, there are monuments to horrendous battles where they, just brutally killed many people, or there's monuments to Caesar that emphasizes his absolute authority as a god, immortalizing him in marble the way he believed himself to be immortalized. So there's just this very complex relationship throughout history of sculpture and authority, and especially problematic authority. And so, I don't think that this means that we shouldn't make monuments. I think, should we tear down problematic monuments? Yes, those need to go away. We can't say we've moved on if we continue to immortalize these things. But, does this mean that we shouldn't make monuments? No, I think this means that this emphasizes the importance of sculpture. Like I said, it brings things to life in such a unique way. And so if we bring to life something hurtful, that is powerful, and that needs to be taken down. But we can also bring to life things that are life-giving, and we can bring to life things that perpetuate hope in the world rather than hatred and destruction. And how do we break that complex relationship of sculpture with power? I don't have an answer for that. Who gets to decide what goes where? That becomes tricky, because at the end of the day, the sculpture needs to be paid for. So it's a very complex dance between, artists standing up for what they believe in, and then the people voicing what they want as well. And we see people voicing, these sculptures need to be torn down. And, we can all say, yes, we agree with that. And so I think this will be a part of a continuing process of saying these sculptures should go away, but we need to put something healing in its place. So those are my scattered thoughts on the subject. There's so much to unpack there, but those are my brief cliff notes, I guess.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, I totally agree. No, I think that's really well said. Yeah. All right, well, I'll definitely open it up now to anyone else on the Zoom call if you have any questions for Justin. Yeah.
I have a question. This is fantastic, Justin. I so appreciate your comments and getting to see your work, and just reflecting on what you were just sharing about art as power. It's so true. I think we're seeing the contingent nature of it, right? But the rhetorical power of it, and how it really is meant. It's time bound in so many ways. It speaks to a certain time and place. But I'm thinking of your work, and I think I heard you say it a few times, how it would like motivate joy in people, like they would laugh or they would smile. And it seems to be that that's like your work is even demonstrating that for us, that maybe one of the ways that art can play a role during a time of crisis is to make us smile, and just kind of recapturing that joy that maybe is lost when art becomes political or, you know, questions of power. I guess I see that in your art, that joyfulness. So I actually have two questions, if I can put them both out there. So one, if just for you to reflect on that, if that really rings true with how you approach your art, that sense of joy and its connection to your Christian faith, because it just, I see it in the work that you do. And then the other one, could you talk about your process as someone who really just, I know next to nothing about ceramics. I'm always interested to hear an artist talk about, like, do you sketch first? Is it form that grabs you first, or is it an idea? And then like literally, like, I don't know if you want to talk, like pick one of the pieces and just kind of quickly walk us through like beginning to end. I just don't know how that stuff comes to be. So anyway, those are two totally different things. Pick whichever one you want.
No worries. Yeah. Yeah, I can speak to both of those. Yeah, joy definitely is, it is important for me, especially as a believer. You know, often I'll have people ask me a lot, like, you know, as an artist and a Christian, like, what do you see, like, how does your art speak to God and speak to, you know, the kingdom of heaven? And that is my simple answer is, you know, there's joy. And you know, I have all these questions about empathy and, you know, identifying with other people, and those are important too. But, you know, even if you can't get that from what I'm making, you know, you can get the joy out of it. And, you know, I think that there are artists who are very brave in how they're able to take on more political issues and able to take on more complex issues. And I think that requires a certain level of fortitude and maturity that, you know, I haven't developed yet. And, you know, I think it takes a lot out of you to create work like that. And so, and that work is important to make. It's important to point towards, you know, things that need to be fixed in our society, but then it's also important to find healing. And laughter is such an important part of healing, and joy is such an important part of that. So that's something that I'm always going for. As to my process, so it does always begin in a sketchbook for me. So I always have 2 or 3 sketchbooks that I'm working in at different times. So it'll be things that, you know, I see around. I'll draw trees or landscapes or things, or I'll sit with my sketchbook open and while I'm watching TV or something and just be doodling little things. And then eventually, you know, an idea comes to my mind of like, oh, you know, maybe a creature that looks like this, maybe a creature that looks like that. And then that gets played out in my sketchbook a little bit. Then eventually, when I've kind of figured out the idea of it, the dimensions of it, then I begin to work on it in clay. And I don't necessarily have photos of my process, but I can pull up just a photo of these. I'll go to Spherodon if I can. So this being one of the more complex pieces, it looked very different. But with all of my work, so I'll draw it out first, try and draw it from every angle. If I'm doing a big piece, I'll try and make a small little version of it in clay. And then with ceramic, the way that ceramics works is, you know, it needs to be fired in a kiln after it's been dried to harden it into that glass-like ceramic material. And part of that process is that it needs to be completely hollow. Otherwise, air or moisture will get trapped in there and it could explode in the kiln, which is no good. So as I'm building these things, they need to be constructed totally hollow inside with air, with holes for the air to escape. So what I'll do is I'll build these forms roughly out of newspaper and cardboard. So they look like these big kind of paper mache, rough versions of what I'm going to create. And then I roll out large slabs of clay and kind of lay them flat over the top and kind of wrap it around this form until I get that clay form created. And then it's a process of like adding the detail, smoothing everything out, you know, adding things like these wrinkles in here, adding the fabric folds, you know, getting it perfect and smooth just like I want it to be. And I agonize over my work. It takes me months to do things that take other artists weeks, but I'm fine with it. It's important to me to be able to work all the way around the piece. And then I take kind of multiple stages of firing. So a lot of ceramicists, they only do 2 firings. So 1 firing to kind of harden the piece, and then they apply a glaze and do another firing to get that glaze into the color that they want it to be. I am known for doing firing after firing after firing to get these things to the point that I want. So I add a lot of bright color, and if it comes out and I don't like it, I'll redo the whole thing. The glazes that I use, I'm able to do that. I'm able to put one glaze on top of another and it works just fine. There are some glazes that you can't do that. But I really just sort of fire these things and redo and redo and redo until I get it at least close to right. And then I have my final piece. For a larger piece like this, there are a lot of like interior structural supports that I need. So that's a process of like, kind of planning it out first, trying to think of, okay, there are pipes that need to go here and there and here. So those become very complex. But for me, the basic process is like drawing, making that paper form, adding the clay over the top, and then eventually firing it to where I want it to be.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Justin, as I'm here because I like your work.
Hi, John.
Hello. I think I'm responding just to your comments about the monuments as art. And it got me thinking how you might think of your work or not think about it in public places. So, we've only seen them in galleries, and then maybe you imagine your work can simply in terms of a limited set of sizes, okay? So my question is, can you imagine any settings outside a gallery where your works could favorably have a place because they meant something to the community that would see them?
Yeah.
No, okay.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to see these outside. That's, I guess, what I'm saying. Can you?
Yeah, I'd love to see them outside. I think that the sizes of these things, come from the constrictions that I have of, the galleries that they're being shown in or the kiln that I'm firing them in. But when I make these things, I imagine them like human size or larger as I'm drawing these things. And I think, I see these in a variety of settings. When I was in Denmark, I was able to take a couple trips into Sweden and Norway. And I went to the Vigeland Museum in Norway, which is an entire museum and park dedicated to the work of Gustav Vigeland. And he was just this amazing sculptor that I had never heard of. And so he has this acres upon acres park of sculptures everywhere. And, they're just in this beautiful setting. There's trees, there's water, it's just a very unique way to experience sculpture. So I definitely see them, in a sculpture park somewhere where people can walk by and enjoy. I'm also really inspired by artists who think about children more than anyone else when they're making their work. So Isamu Noguchi, he made a couple slides. He was this very serious sculptor who showed in galleries all over the world. He has work in museums, but then he also just made playgrounds for kids. He would carve these giant slides that are all over Japan and kids love them. Tom Otterness as well is another sculptor that I love, who he makes these sort of kind of like cartoony robot figures, which are also, they're all over New York. They're in subways, they're in museums, they're in the Cathedral of St. John the Divine. But then he also made an entire playground for kids with his little characters everywhere. So I guess, yeah, I do see them outdoors. I think I see them in settings where families really can interact with these things because, with my childhood experience with cartoons and with comic books is so important when I create these things that I want children to be able to identify with it as well. So I really see, this in spaces where kids can interact with them in a unique way. Because in a gallery, you can't touch these things. But if you create this work outside, working in stone or bronze or something, then that's when people can really interact with the piece. So I would love to see these things outside. Hopefully one day they'll make their way out there.
And can I ask a second question? Simply because I know that you were on the Orvieto semester a couple years ago. and that's dear to my heart. And I can imagine that some people would say, wow, your work is just of a totally different universe than all of the artwork you would have seen, in Italy, especially in the Renaissance. So my question positively is, what were did you learn any lessons for yourself through that experience in Orvieto for your own work?
Yeah, I did. I think, well, the Orvieto experience, across the board, when you ask people about it, they will say how important it was to them artistically and personally. And I think, for me, just as an artist, it was encouraging to see a culture that is so shaped by its artwork and really emphasizes the importance of the artwork that they create. But also just some more like artsy technical lessons I learned was especially looking at the work of Italian sculptors during the Baroque period, so the works of Bernini, and all of the wonderful Baroque cathedrals. There are these sculptures that just seem to defy gravity. You get things like Bernini's David, and he's twisting and throwing the stone at Goliath, and you get the sculpture of Saint Teresa, where there's these beautiful folds of fabric and clouds. So you see, in the cathedrals of Italy, you see these sculptures that just seem to defy the laws of physics. And they do that, in a commitment to this greater reality that they're trying to express. And you also, see in the works of the Romans, this commitment to the myths of Greek and Roman mythology. So I think that commitment to a world, like an interior world, I think is something that I really appreciate. And just that idea of creating something that defies gravity. So, I'm always making these things with arms and tentacles that are bubbling over. Spherodon's arms are all over the place, and it was such a pain to get them to work that way. But that comes from seeing those sculptures in Italy. And, a lot of times if I'm out of ideas, I go back to the books that I got there, and I'll start drawing. I'll open my Michelangelo book and start doing studies. And eventually those morph into these creatures. So for me, it's really all connected. I totally understand why people will look at this and think, well, how, what does this have to do with the stuff that you learned in school? Because I was making, very traditional portraits and landscapes and still lifes and things. But, once you learn that opens the doorway for these things. So Orvieto, I think, was really important for me. While it didn't instantly lead to the work that I'm doing today, I messed around a little bit until I got to my thesis, which pointed the way towards this work. I think it was integral in that process.
Great.
Yeah.
And then I just had one more question too, Justin. I know that we've had some incoming and prospective students tune into these. So I was just wondering if you had any general advice to give to incoming art majors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Boy, it's, first of all, you're going to have a great time. There's just wonderful people working there. And I think, that there's a delicate balance, and I think all college students find this, the balance between doing your work and, the social aspects of college, being with your friends. And, both are so important to making your artwork. It takes long hours in the studio, but long hours in the studio mean you're tired and you need a break. So I think fell victim to just overemphasizing the importance of my studio time when I was at Gordon, and it's exhausting. So, and I think finally by the time I reached my senior year, I realized I can't be in here all the time. I need to hang out with people. So, make that time for the studio, make extra time for the studio, because it is so important and you learn so much. But it's also so important when you feel yourself getting tired, go hang out with your friends, because that will do so much more for your artwork than just pounding away in there hour after hour.
That's great. Great advice.
Yeah.
All right. Well, any other final questions for Justin here?
Really just a comment that just back to your point about empathy and how your work instills empathy. Just as I've been seeing your work during this presentation, in many ways, it's quite convicting. I think you made that comment about like why people would be drawn to like these really alien, cartoony kind of figures, more than maybe like the person standing next to them or in their community or even in their churches. Once you get over like that initial reaction of like laughter and smiling, how kind of cute the sculptures are, there really is like an edge to it, I guess. I don't know if I'm reading this right, but it really, the more I think and see your work, that there really is that bit of conviction that comes along. Like, why are we drawn to these creatures that are just so, we assume cute and cuddly and so different from us, but not be willing like to make those same kind of empathetic leaps to the person who really shares more of those not just features but qualities, to us. I don't know, is that an accurate way to read it? Is like once you get beyond that initial like laughter, there's an edge there.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I think people don't always get to that that point of recognizing that edge. So there are times when I try and make work that's a little more uncomfortable rather than cute. And so it's good to hear that you're seeing that people see it. So thank you so much.
Well, it's great. It's great work for this time, I would say, just all the stuff that's going on in our world. It's so keep at it. Get back to the kiln, make more stuff.
Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Well, yeah, we'll start to wrap up here. Justin, I'm wondering if you just have any final words, and if you'd also just be willing to share too where we can go to support your work if people are interested in staying up to date or would be interested in purchasing any of your artwork.
Yeah. You can go to my website. It's just justinkedl.com. From there, you can find links to my Instagram. That's where I most commonly put stuff up. I'm still I'm between a couple different places right now trying to consolidate my artwork, but I'm trying to find ways to make it more readily available to people. So if you follow me on Instagram, then you can stay tuned to ways to support me.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, Justin, thank you again so much for joining us this evening. Any other final words from anybody else? Any final comments?
Yeah. Thank
Great.
you so much. It's been an honor.
Yeah, thank you. It's been super fun. Thanks, everyone, if you're watching this recorded later on. Thanks for tuning in. Just a reminder that our second to last session is in 2 weeks. We have the week off next week, but so 2 weeks from today, and Meredith Free will be presenting on some more art and art-related topics. So be sure to tune in for that. And then in 3 weeks, we have our final session of the summer, which is going to be a theater education workshop hosted by Kayla Dixon. So you won't want to miss that. So stay tuned, stay up to date. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see y'all next time.